In a small, dusty village where the mornings began with the sound of roosters and the evenings ended in silence, there lived a boy whose life was marked by struggle. His house was nothing more than 4 cracked walls and a leaking roof, but within those walls lived dreams too big for such a small place. Every morning, before the sun fully rose, the boy would wake to the faint cry of his mother calling him for school. Their home smelled of damp soil and smoke from the clay stove. His mother's hands were rough, her face pale with exhaustion, yet her eyes carried love. She had nothing to give him, no proper food, no fine clothes, but she gave him courage in whispers. He would wash his face with cold water from a rusty bucket, wear his torn uniform, and pick up his old school bag, its threads hanging loose like his life itself. Then he would step out into the village road, where the dust clung to his feet and the stares of neighbors followed him. As he walked towards the school, he could see the difference that life had carved between him and others. Children from rich families arrived in shining cars, polished shoes glistening, their laughter filling the air. Their parents waved goodbye with pride, while he walked alone, barefoot, with only silence as his companion. But deep within, he whispered to himself, one day, things will change. Inside the school, reality was harsh. The classrooms were filled with chatter, but his desk stood in the corner, old and broken. He placed his books quietly, avoiding the mocking gazes. His classmates snickered, whispering cruel jokes. Look at his clothes. Look at his shoes, oh wait, he doesn't even have any. Laughter would erupt, piercing his heart like knives. The teachers, too, seemed blind to his efforts. They looked at him as though he was invisible, their attention always on the children from wealthy homes. If he raised his hand to answer, their eyes passed over him. If he scored well, it was dismissed as luck. Each day felt like a battle he was destined to lose. But the boy never shouted, never argued. He swallowed his pain and chose silence. And in that silence, he built strength. His heart whispered, one day, this silence will speak louder than their laughter. Evenings were no easier. While others went home to warm meals and loving comfort, he walked alone along the dusty road, his stomach aching from hunger. By the time he reached his little house, the oil lamp barely lit the room. His mother would hand him a piece of dry bread, sometimes nothing at all, her eyes filled with guilt. He would smile softly, pretending he wasn't hungry, and say, it's enough, Amma. After his meal, or sometimes without one, he would sit under the weak glow of a flickering lamp, his old book in hand. The world outside grew dark, the winds howled through broken windows, but he read with burning eyes. Each word felt like a step, each page like a ladder pulling him closer to his dreams. He had no guide, no tutor, no comfort, but he had determination. And that was enough. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, but the routine never changed, silence in the day, struggle in the evening, study at night. His body grew thinner, his clothes older, but his mind grew sharper. The pain of hunger, the sting of mockery, the loneliness of nights, all of it became fuel for his fire. And deep within, he began to believe, the world may ignore me today, but one day, they will have no choice but to see me. One winter evening, the boy walked home later than usual. The cold wind bit into his skin, and the road stretched endlessly beneath his tired feet. He had spent the entire day in school being ridiculed, and his body ached from hunger. By the time he reached the edge of the village, his legs could no longer carry him. His frail body collapsed on the roadside. The world seemed to fade. The stars above blurred, and his breath came in shallow whispers. For a moment, he felt as if life itself was slipping away. But somewhere, in the depth of his fading strength, a voice echoed inside him, get up. You cannot give up now. Not yet. He forced himself to rise. His hands trembled as he pushed against the cold ground. Step by painful step, he walked until he reached the broken wooden bench near the street lamp. The dim yellow glow fell upon his face, and with the little strength left in him, he pulled out his book. His stomach groaned with emptiness, his body begged for rest, but his mind was louder than his pain. He whispered, hunger can wait. Dreams cannot. That night, as the cold winds howled through the silent streets, the boy read until his eyes could no longer stay open. His fingers traced each word as though he was carving it into his soul. And when at last he closed the book, he made himself a promise, one day, this suffering will have meaning. One day, this silence will roar. Days turned into weeks, and the boy's routine remained the same. But slowly, a change began to take shape within him. While others spent their time in comfort, he spent his nights battling exhaustion and loneliness. Knowledge became his only companion, his only weapon. Then came an announcement that stirred the school. A competition grand, challenging, and prestigious was to be held. It was not just a simple test, it was a stage where the brightest minds would compete for honor. The prize was not money, but something far more valuable, recognition. When the boy decided to participate, laughter once again filled the air. His classmates mocked him openly. "He doesn't even have shoes, how will he stand on stage?" Another added, "He will embarrass himself in front of everyone." Even some teachers, with subtle glances, doubted his ability. But the boy remained silent. He had learned that silence was more powerful than anger. While they laughed, he studied. While they wasted time, he prepared. Every insult became a reason to sharpen his mind further. The night before the competition, he sat once again beneath the dim street lamp. His book rested on his lap, his hands cold, but his eyes alive. He whispered into the darkness, "Tomorrow, I will not just answer questions. Tomorrow, I will answer every insult, every doubt, every laugh they threw at me." The next morning, the school hall buzzed with excitement. Children in polished uniforms filled the seats, their parents watching proudly. Teachers stood tall, awaiting brilliance from their favorite students. And then, quietly, the boy entered. His uniform was still torn, his shoes still broken, but his presence carried something different and unshakable calm. As he took his seat, whispers spread through the hall. Some laughed, some pitied, but he ignored them all. His eyes were fixed only on the stage, only on the dream he had carried for so long. And when the first question was asked, something remarkable happened. His mind, trained through countless nights of struggle, worked with speed and clarity. While others hesitated, he wrote with confidence. While others doubted, he believed. Each round passed, and with every question, the boy's silence grew louder. The same silence that once hid his pain was now speaking for him, echoing through every correct answer, every confident response. By the end of the competition, the atmosphere of the hall had shifted. The laughter was gone. The mockery had turned into uneasy silence. Teachers leaned forward, surprised. Classmates exchanged nervous glances. And the boy, who once had nothing, now stood at the center of everyone's attention. The competition reached its final round. The air inside the hall was heavy with silence, broken only by the sound of pens scratching paper. Teachers exchanged glances, parents leaned forward, and students nervously awaited the last question. The boy, sitting quietly at his desk, felt no fear. His heart beat steadily, his mind clear. He thought of the countless nights under the flickering lamp, the hunger that had carved scars into his body, the laughter that had bruised his spirit. This moment is not just a test, he told himself. This is the answer to every hardship I have endured. When the final question was read aloud, many students frowned in confusion. Some whispered, some hesitated. But the boy's eyes lit up. The answer was not easy, but it was one he had seen before, one he had studied in the lonely hours of the night. His pen moved with purpose, each stroke carrying the weight of his struggle. Minutes later, the papers were collected, and the hall buzzed with restless chatter. Students in shiny shoes whispered to their parents about how difficult it was. Teachers tried to predict who would win. But in one corner of the room sat the boy, calm and still, as though his soul already knew the result. Then, the principal walked to the stage, holding the sheets of paper. His voice carried authority as he began announcing the results. "Third place," he called, and the hall erupted with claps as a wealthy student stood. "Second place," the name of another rich student followed, his family cheering loudly. And then came the moment. The principal paused, scanning the hall. "And the first place," he said, his voice firm, "goes to the boy who surprised us all." He spoke the boy's name. For a second, silence filled the hall. It was as though time itself had stopped. And then, gasps spread across the room. Heads turned. Eyes widened. The same classmates who once mocked him now stared in disbelief. Teachers who once ignored him clapped reluctantly, shame hidden behind their smiles. Parents who had taught their children to laugh at him now whispered in shock. The boy stood up slowly, his torn uniform swaying as he walked to the stage. He did not smile, nor did he look at those who once mocked him. He walked with quiet dignity, his steps steady, his eyes calm. When the certificate of victory was placed in his hands, it was not just paper, it was the proof of his endurance, his sacrifice, his unshakable spirit. The applause grew louder, but inside, the boy felt no need to celebrate. He remembered the hunger that had once kept him awake, the lonely nights under the street lamp, the cruel laughter that echoed in his ears. All of it had brought him here. This victory was not over his classmates, it was over his pain, his despair, his past. As he stood on that stage, he looked at the crowd and thought, "You laughed at me when I was weak. You doubted me when I was silent. But it was in that silence that I found my strength. This victory is not yours to give, it is mine to claim." That evening, as he walked home with the certificate pressed against his chest, the dusty road felt different. The same villagers who once doubted him now looked at him with respect. Some even nodded in quiet admiration. His mother, waiting at the door, saw him coming. Tears filled her weary eyes as he held out the certificate. She embraced him tightly, whispering, "I always knew, my son. I always knew." For the first time in his life, the boy allowed himself to cry not from pain, but from relief. The tears carried years of suffering, washing away the wounds of his past. In that moment, he realized something greater than victory: pain had not broken him. It had built him. And though he had won the competition, he understood that this was only the beginning. His fight was not just for himself anymore, it was for every child who felt powerless, for every dreamer trapped in silence, for every poor soul mocked by privilege. His life had become a message, a story to be remembered. Your past does not define you. Your struggle does not destroy you. It prepares you for greatness. Years passed after that day of triumph. The boy who once studied under a street lamp was no longer just a poor child with dreams, he was now a young man whose story had spread far beyond the walls of his village school. Newspapers wrote about him, teachers used his journey as an example, and children whispered his name with admiration. But for him, life had not suddenly become easy. Poverty still followed him, hunger still tested him, and hardships still knocked at his door. Yet, something inside him had changed forever. He no longer feared pain. He had walked through fire once, and it had made him stronger than steel. At every stage of his life, he carried the same lesson: endurance is not weakness, it is silent power. When he entered college, wealthier students again mocked him for his simple clothes. Professors doubted his abilities because he lacked polish, because his hands were rough, because his accent was different. But each time, he remembered the street lamp, the hunger, the laughter, and he smiled. For he knew, if he could conquer that darkness once, he could do it again and again. Slowly, his brilliance began to shine. He won scholarships, debates, competitions. Every victory was not just his own, it belonged to the child he once was, to the boy who had once sat alone, shivering in the cold, fighting with hunger. It belonged to every nameless struggler who believed they had no chance. And yet, despite his success, he never forgot where he came from. Each evening, he would walk back to the same dusty street, sit by the same lamp, and watch children running around. Some wore shoes, some did not. Some laughed, some cried. He saw himself in them, and he made a vow: one day, I will build a place where no child has to choose between hunger and learning. Where no child is mocked for their torn uniform. Where dreams are not the privilege of the rich, but the right of every child. That vow became his mission. Years later, when he stood as a man grown, with a reputation that stretched across the nation, he used his success not to escape his people but to lift them. He opened schools for the poor, places where no child was turned away. He gave scholarships to those who thought education was beyond their reach. He built libraries where the silence of books replaced the silence of despair. People began to call him a leader, a teacher, a visionary. But he never saw himself as any of those. In his heart, he was still the boy walking barefoot to school, still the boy clutching a single notebook, still the boy mocked for his hunger. And that memory kept him humble. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, he sat with his mother, now old and frail. She held his hand and whispered, "Do you remember the night you cried yourself to sleep because there was no food?" Do you remember the day the world laughed at you? He nodded silently. And do you see now, she continued, how those nights, those tears, those scars were not curses? They were gifts. They gave you the strength to become what you are. Her words echoed in his soul, and he finally understood the deeper truth of his journey. Pain is not the enemy, it is the sculptor of greatness. The story of the boy spread across villages, towns, and cities. His life became a living testimony for countless others. Whenever a child felt powerless, his name was spoken. Whenever someone doubted themselves, his story was told. And wherever hopelessness tried to bury dreams, his example rose like a light. And so, the boy who once stood on a stage with a torn uniform and a trembling heart became more than just a winner of a competition. He became a legend. Not because he had everything, but because he had endured everything. His life whispered a message to the world. Struggle is not your enemy. Pain is not your prison. If you have the courage to endure, even silence can become your greatest strength.